present. If I might have a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right, we have several items here. Looks like about 10 items. First item is a resolution adopting an annual operating budget for fiscal year 2020 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the first of two pieces related to the 2020 operating budget. This is a resolution that we must pass along with the budget in order to establish the appropriation for 2020. Why don't we, at this point, we do have an overview of the 2020 budget, and we can kind of go through that and then process the two pieces that we're reading in today, if that's okay with you.
Very good.
Okay. So everyone should have received a document that looks like this. This is in a similar format to what we've presented in the past, which is an overview of the 2020 budget plan executive summary. So in this document, we will share some assumptions that we are making for the 2020 budget. We'll start with the revenue assumptions. So you can see that our item number one, which is our primary source of income for the general fund, is our income tax, and we are expecting that to increase by about 2.25%. So last year we had about a 5% increase, which we were thankful to see. This year we're always very conservative with that number. It's typically between 2 and 2.5%, so we kind of split the difference this year, and we're forecasting about a 2.25% growth in our income tax. And then our local government fund, we expect to remain stable. We might see a slight increase in that, but as you know, we receive quite a bit less money than we did, in decades past. Right now, we get around $7 million, where we used to get north of $14 million. So the past several years, we've kind of settled into a $6.5 to $7 million range in terms of our local government fund collections, and we expect that to stay about that level this year. And then our property tax revenues also, our assessed valuation has remained fairly stable over the past few years, so we anticipate revenues about what we received last year, so pretty flat property tax collections. And then we will not have any increase in water sewer fee service rates for 2020 like we've done for the past several years.
Thank you.
And then finally, a little bit of good news that you're all aware of, our gas tax revenue through the state has, we've received some extra money starting in about August of last year. So this year's anticipated increase in the gas tax should be about 38%.
I know we'll talk about this here in the coming days. 38% represents what in dollars?
It's about $3.5 million extra. And then on the expenditure side, we are in the second year of a 3-year labor agreement with all 4 of our unions and our non-bargaining employees. So all employees will receive a 2.75% cost of living adjustment for 2020. The chargeback for healthcare costs, last year we charged back about $1,650 a month for each full-time employee to cover the claims and healthcare costs. This year that number is going to jump up to about $1,700 a month, so a slight increase there. We do anticipate some inflation in our healthcare claims, which will be partially offset by some plan design changes that we made for this 3-year labor agreement. So we do anticipate a little bit of inflation in those costs, but we've offset some of that by plan design changes that we've made with our bargaining unit agreements. And then this year, this budget does reflect the fact that we did hire 45 police officers towards the end of last year. So we will see a slight uptick in our general fund budget, because last year we had 455 officers budgeted in general fund. This year that number is up around 465, so about 10 additional officers beyond what we budgeted last year. And then we are also hiring some staff in our IT department. So we've gone through a series of evaluations of our IT staff, and we are just in the early stages of hiring 10 additional staff for 2020. I think the first positions have just gone through our Civil Service Commission, and we are ready to hire that staff. So we do anticipate hiring about 10 additional employees in our IT department in 2020. And then one of the big changes in our 2020 budget is the fact that we have some additional debt service this year due to the large CSO projects that we've been doing. So the Ohio Canal Interceptor Tunnel debt service just started in July. That bond alone is an additional $13 million of debt service this year in our sewer fund, and our total sewer fund debt service goes up about $19.5 million. So of the total budget increase for the city, which is about $40 million, so it's going from about $611 million last year to $650 million this year. About half of that difference is the sewer debt service in that fund. And the majority of the rest of it is just from the additional wages and benefits from the additional people, and as well as the cost of living increases that we have in place for 2020. So the bulk of the budget increases from those two areas.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, page 2, I'm not going to get too much into detail, but for the newer council members, this is kind of a description of the various expenditure categories that we have within our budget. So when we appropriate budget here in the city of Akron, we will appropriate for each fund and department, and then within each fund and department, we will appropriate into 3 different account categories. So we have the wages and benefits as one category, all of the contractual debt service, insurance, all the things you see under that other category are basically all of our other expenditures to vendors that do not include capital outlay items, and those are items that we capitalize on our financial statements that have a value of over $7,500. So those are kind of accounted for separately. The bulk of our vendor expenses are appropriated under that other category. Okay, on page 3, this is an overview of our general fund budget for 2020. And as you can see in the far most right column, it is by and large a flat budget over last year. So we are anticipating revenue of about $173,137,360. Our expenditures we anticipate to be slightly less than that, or $173,128,930. So by and large, this is a flat budget within the general fund. Then on page 4, you could see the revenue and expense categories for our general fund. As you can see from the revenue chart there, that the bulk of our revenues within the general fund do come from our income tax category. We'll let things clear out outside. So about 68%, and that includes income tax, property tax, JED revenues, and there's really not much in the assessments category within the general fund. And then we also have the other big item within the general fund revenues are our charges for services, and that is primarily our court revenues and our curb service charges that make up the bulk of that amount. And then as you can see in the expense chart down on the bottom, you can see how the wages and benefits are the bulk of our expenditures within the general fund. So, you know, with all of our departments do have some operations within the general fund. Primarily our police and fire are the biggest pieces within general fund, and those are very labor-centric in terms of the expense there, so that does comprise the bulk of our general fund expenses. Then on page 5, this is a listing by all of the various funds that we will appropriate budget for. These are the revenues that we expect to receive in each one of those funds. And you can see a comparison between what we're budgeting this year and what we received last year. The total anticipated revenues for the city in 2020 are about $641.3 million. And then on page 6 is a similar chart that shows the expenses that we will be appropriating. This is what we'll be looking at over the next 3 days. So we will be appropriating about $650 million, $650.5 million in 2020.
Just for our newer members in that we're not allowed to deficit spend or have by Ohio code.
That is correct. Now, there might be places where we have existing fund balance that we will draw down, so we are allowed to do that.
And I just was looking through the information that you had sent out here just a few days ago, saw that. But before our new members that have come on, even if you're not on the committee, I'd encourage you to be in the meetings. We start at 3. We're going to try to keep those from 3 to 5 as much as possible. But it does help you to get kind of a 30,000-foot view of the city, its departments. You'll leave with more questions than answers. I mean, I know just sitting through the process every year, there's more things I realize that I don't know, but encourage new members, if they could, please come out, and you will learn. You'll come away with a better sense of where we get our money, who the departments are, who the department heads are. It's just a good exercise, good mental exercise to understand where it is you work.
Right, and you will see as we go through the budgets, a lot of it is budgeted down to quite a detailed level. For instance, within the police department, we have a number of grant funds, and we will appropriate an amount for each one of those. So all in, I think we have over 200 separate budgets that we will be appropriating. So the final page of the overview is on page 7, which shows our full-time employee count. So this year we are budgeting about 1,921 employees, which is an increase of 21 employees over last year. And the bulk of that are from those 2 areas that I outlined. So we have some additional police officers, and then we are also hiring some IT staff. So between the 2 of those departments, and there's increases up and down all across the city, but the large changes from those 2 areas. So our current count of employees, right now we are about 1,829, I believe, which we typically always have about 100 vacancies within the city. So that's pretty typical that the amount that we budget is about 100 employees higher than our count at any given time, and that's stayed fairly consistent over the years. And then down on the bottom, you could see our general fund count, which does go up slightly. That's due to those additional police officers. We also have some firefighters that were previously charged to a grant fund that are now charged on the general fund as well. So any questions on the budget overview? You should have all received over the weekend, I think I sent it out on Friday, the detail of what will be presented with the council hearings, along with the schedule as well, yes.
And, I'm not, I should know this. I'm just using the one I have on my iPad. Are there going to be hard copies or no?
My understanding is that the council clerk's office will print out hard copies, yes, so they did inquire about that, and I think they are preparing hard copies for everyone.
You're going to print out hard copies for everyone?
Don't feel like you need to avail yourself of that if you're more comfortable doing it with an iPad.
I mean, we got to be talking a ream or 2 of paper, I would think.
Right.
And we have it on our iPads. Your guys' call, but I just, I guess if you maybe want 1 or 2 hard copies, but we all have it. And we even have it, we have the capability of making notes on the forms that we have, but that's up to you and the president.
I'll take one. I have a question.
All right.
Okay.
Mike?
Yes.
Mr. Fricker?
Yes.
Can you give an example, on page 2, the local government fund revenues that remain stable? You said about $7 million. What are some examples of the local government fund revenues outside of, because I know the property taxes is...
Well, that particular item that I'm referring to is there is a state statute that basically the state shares a portion of its general revenue collections with each municipality and each county within the state. And that is all allocated based on population. So it's something that has been in place, I think it went all the way back to the 1930s, where the state was looking to put an income tax on the ballot, and they partnered with the political leaders in each city in order to get it passed, and, you know, in return, basically promised to share some of it with these cities and counties. So, you know, so this local government fund has been in place for years. Now, it does go up and down. Most recently, back in 2009, 2010 is when they substantially reduced what they send out to each city. So like I said, we used to get about $14 million, and now we get about half of that.
And the sharing comes like
It comes
July,
through the county, so
August.
we get a monthly distribution.
Oh, it's
Yeah, we get a
monthly.
monthly distribution through the county. You know, they basically distribute all the amounts to each auditor's office within each county, and then they in turn distribute out to the cities.
Thank you.
Mr. Mobian?
The gas tax revenue, the increase, there was a recent increase that the governor talked about. This represents that, at 38%?
That is correct, yeah.
And it
This
started...
is the state change that was enacted last year.
Okay, and we started receiving that when?
We started getting it in late summer last year. I want to say August or September.
Okay.
We got our first increased distribution.
Okay.
You'd indicated about $3.5 million.
Yeah, so that's actually the increase over the base amount. So our increase this year, because we did start getting some of it at the end of last year, won't be, the total increase is actually more than 38. 38 represents the additional amount we'll get in calendar year 20 versus calendar year 19.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much.
So in terms of the legislation, obviously, we just would put this on time.
Right. So we just a motion for time on the resolution.
So moved.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Second item is an ordinance to make the annual appropriation for the current expenses, other expenditures, and capital outlays of the city of Akron for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2020, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is the actual appropriation, which will be broken down according to that structure that I outlined, where it is each fund department combination, and then within each fund department combination, we appropriate within wages and benefits, other, and capital outlay. So there will be a number for each area within that structure.
We'll be saying it in our sleep by Thursday.
Exactly.
All righty, motion to place this item on the regular agenda.
So moved.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, item number 3, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and/or his designees to apply for, to accept if awarded, and to enter into an agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Education for after-school program grants for the 2020-2021 school year and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Each year, we come to council and ask that council authorize the city into entering into the grant application. We partner with Akron Public Schools. Last year, we applied for 1 renewal grant and 3 new grants. We received just the 1 renewal. So this year, we'll apply for yet another renewal of that grant. They're typically like a 3 to 5 year grant, and a couple new grants, and we'll just see what, if anything, the city is awarded. We do then contract with Akron Public Schools. They put on all the after-school programs, administer the program very nicely. But in order to get the grant, the city has to be the applicant of the grant.
The amount, please.
It varies. For the past 2 years, we've received $200,000. but they're going back in history, we used to have 5 going at one time. So it just depends what funds are available and how they distribute them.
And I should know this, but is there any other agencies besides Akron Public Schools that some of these dollars are going to?
Like AMHA will apply for the grants and partner with Akron Public Schools as well. When some of our grants started dropping off, we noticed that AMHA was being awarded grants. So Akron Public Schools are still getting the funding. It's just different mechanisms on how they're getting it.
Okay, very good. Other questions? All right, would consent be okay on this? Oh, yes, Ms. Amobian?
Yeah, just quick. This is the program that Mrs. Bolden operates for city.
She's a big part of it, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
There's 2 separate programs. This is one of them.
Consent be okay?
That would be wonderful.
We have a motion for consent.
So moved.
A motion and a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, very good. Item number 4, this is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into, execute, and deliver a cooperative agreement with the Development Finance Authority of Summit County in connection with the refunding of bonds previously issued by the authority to finance the costs of certain improvements to Canal Park Stadium and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So these next 7 pieces, I believe, are all somewhat related. And this is due to the kind of the upheaval that we've seen in our financial markets over the past, roughly 2 to 3 weeks as a result of the coronavirus. So that upheaval, while there's a lot of negative impacts of that, has created some opportunities for us to refund some of our existing bonds that are outstanding. So we're going to look at these 7 different pieces of debt and put legislation in place such that we can refinance these and take advantage of these rates while they are as low as they are, which they're at historically low levels now. The 10-year Treasury began the year at 1.88%. It's down to like 0.5% right now, which is unprecedented.
Do we have a cumulative total for the savings? For
So the
these 7
total
pieces?
savings here are about $18.2 million of savings over the life of all of these bonds.
Sure.
So this particular bond is actually one where the city, while we are covering the debt service, it's actually issued by the Development Finance Authority, but we have the ability to pass legislation with their consent, which we already have, to refinance these bonds. So this particular bond, we can achieve savings of about $468,000. It's about almost 13% savings. So over the life of the bonds, savings of about $468,000.
So should we, as consent, or do we want to get this done?
I would ask for suspension of the rules
Okay,
on
very
all of
good.
these. Yeah.
Questions or comments? Mr. Malik?
So I think each of the bonds, the current bonds are different years, but how far would this extend the life of the?
It wouldn't extend the lives at all, yeah. So
Okay.
typically, these would all be, the new bonds would go out to the same maturities that the old bonds had. But
Okay.
you'll see some of these are actually bonds that are maturing just in a few years, which typically we wouldn't probably even look at those. But with these low interest rates and the fact that, if they go back up next year, the opportunity to save probably wouldn't be there at all. So we're going to look at a few issues that typically we wouldn't, because the savings aren't, in terms of that percentage savings, normally we'd like to be up over, 5-6%. Some of these are lower than that. But when we kind of combine all of these into one big refinancing, then it makes economic sense to refinance some of these bonds, even though the savings levels are rather low.
Oh, are there any risks associated with the refinancing?
The only risk is whether we do it, so in terms of we will absolutely save money, by refinancing these bonds. Now, the risk is you can wait, and if rates go down further, then, we could have waited and saved more money. So that's a risk you have to take in terms
Sure.
of, do you take what savings you know now and lock those in, or do you wait for, rates to potentially go even lower? So that's the big risk.
Thank you.
Is there any chance these, normally when we issue these, they're just snapped up. Is there any chance that a bond can tarry out there before somebody comes along and...
It could. So when we sell these bonds, we work with an underwriter, and we will go out when we price the bonds. We will price the bonds on a particular day. They try to market those bonds at that level. If they're not selling at all, then we might reevaluate the rates that we're trying to issue them at. Oftentimes, though, the underwriters will, if some of the bonds are unsold, they will step up and actually acquire the bonds themselves, and then they end up just selling those off at a later time. Yeah.
I know that's the way we do it in our household. This is, I don't know if anybody's ever had the opportunity to see a transaction like this when it's maybe on a large capital item, but it's quite the event to see.
Yeah, we can actually watch it live. There's a piece of software called iPrio that we get where you can see the orders actually come in and which bonds are selling. Sometimes they're oversubscribed 2 or 3 times, which means that you have more buyers than you have bonds, in which case, and you can actually lower the rates a little bit, and then sometimes it works the other way around, where you have to tick the rates up a little bit.
Any other questions or comments? Like to entertain a motion for suspension of the rules. And have a motion and a second for suspension of the rules. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. All right, very good. We're on item number 6, I believe. Is that correct?
I think 5,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, pardon you. Pardon me. Here we go. Ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of bonds in the maximum principal amount of $2,600,000 for the purpose of refunding certain maturities of income tax revenue bonds of the city issued in 2011 and declaring an emergency.
Yes, so this is to refinance our 2011 income tax revenue. These were the pension bonds. They refunded our original pension issue that we issued back in 1999, and now we have a chance to refinance that again. This is one of the issues that I mentioned. So this doesn't go out past 2023, so it's a very short maturity, but it still is presenting about $84,000 in savings, which is about 3.2% savings. So when we roll this in with all these other ones, it makes sense to include this one and get those. Even though it's kind of moderate savings, it's still savings.
I'd say stewardship demands that you go ahead and roll it in there with it if you can. So any questions or comments? Mr. Malik?
I had a question. On page 1 of the ordinance, it has a definition for basic income tax that says the city's municipal income tax excluding the 0.25% from 2003. I was just wondering, does that reflect also issue 4?
Yes, correct. So the issue for, the CLC 0.25% from 2003 is pledged specifically for those CLC bonds. And then when we refer to the basic income tax, it now refers to the 2.25%. So the original 2 plus the 2 from issue 4 would be pledged towards those bonds.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Question. All right, have a motion for suspension of the rules on item number 5.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, item number 6, an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of bonds in the maximum principal amount of $4,050,000 for the purpose of refunding certain maturities of general obligation bonds of the city issued in 2010 and declaring an emergency.
Yes, so this is to refinance our 2010A GEO bond series. The approximate savings here is about $93,000. This is another bond that matures in 2023. So the savings percentage is about 2.3% on this, and it's about $93,000.
Okay, very good. Questions or comments? Motion for suspension of the rules? We have a first and we have a primary motion and a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Okay. Moving on, item number 7, an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of bonds in the maximum principal amount of $21,090,000 for the purpose of refunding certain maturities of income tax revenue bonds of the city issued in 2012 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for our 2012 income tax revenue bonds. The approximate savings here is about $1,120,000, which is a good level of savings. So this is about 12.5% savings on this particular issue.
Questions or comments? Motion for suspension of the rules? Motion a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Opposed? All right. Item number 8, an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of bonds in the maximum principal amount of $1,640,000 for the purpose of refunding certain maturities of general obligation bonds of the city issued in 2010 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is on our 2010 B series of general obligation bonds. This generates savings of about $74,000, which is about 4.45% savings.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Motion for suspension of the rules? All in favor? All right, we'll pass that out this evening. Ordinance number 9, ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of bonds of the city in a maximum amount, principal amount of $135,025,000 for the purpose of refunding bonds issued by the city in 2012 and 2014 to pay the costs of acquiring, constructing, improving, renovating, repairing, enlarging, adding to, reconstructing, maintaining, equipping, furnishing, acquiring interests in real property in connection with, improving the sites of, and otherwise improving community learning centers and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is for our 2012 and 2014 CLC bonds. So the total savings here is about $15,850,000. Now, while that amount is by far the bulk of the savings of all these ordinances that were presented, this one is actually the most questionable that we'll actually move forward with, and that is because potentially it would make sense to wait on this one because we're actually 2 years plus from the call of these bonds. So this is one that we'll have to evaluate very carefully. If the rates keep going way down, it may make more sense to do this, but as it stands right now, it probably actually makes more sense to wait on this one for a couple years. So this is one that we're going to watch very carefully. It's about 12% savings now, but if we wait a couple years, as we get closer to the call, it will probably generate greater savings than what we're seeing here right now.
You're feeling lucky.
Yeah, so that's, again, this is one that we will, monitor very carefully and make a decision as to whether we move forward with
Would
this
just
one or
refer
not.
this item?
Well, we still want it in
want
place,
it-
so because
okay,
if
you
we
still want it in
do
place.
move forward, these are all going to be bundled together when we market them.
Okay.
So,
Questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Malik?
Is this the only series of bonds relating to the CLCs?
in this group of refundings, yes. It's not the only group of bonds, it's not all the CLC bonds that are outstanding. This is just,
What is the amount that?
so the total outstanding amount right now is about $230 million. This is about, roughly half of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
My question was very similar. When we first entered into the agreement, it was what, for 30 years?
Correct. So all of the CLC bonds, or the income tax goes out to 2033.
Okay.
Most of the bonds go out to 2033.
I see. Thank you.
All right, do I have a motion for suspension of the rules? Motion a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Opposed? All right, very good. And finally, ordinance number 10, an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of bonds in the maximum principal amount of $18,495,000 for the purpose of refunding certain maturities of general obligation bonds of the city issued in 2011 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is on our 2011 GO bonds. Anticipated savings is about $498,000 over the life of the bonds. and this is about 2.65% savings.
Very good. Questions or comments? Have a motion for suspension of the rules? Motion and a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Okay, we'll pass it out this evening. Thank you, as we've thanked you before, for paying attention to these things and saving the taxpayers millions of dollars. So thank you very much, and we'll see these items are passed out this evening. Thank you. Any other business come before us? If not, we will adjourn at 3:35. Thank you.